This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by Prize Picks. Coming at you Thursday evening. We're live here on YouTube. It's February 1st, and today's show is going to be a reaction to the announcement of the All-Star reserves, and then we're also going to do a more sort of focused trade deadline preview, myself and Kyle. We'll react to Anthony Edwards making the All-Star team, Karl-Anthony Towns making the team, Rudy Gobert does not. And then we'll talk about the trade deadline. I really want to focus on what the Wolves have to offer, and then talk about that against how much potential players to trade for cost in terms of their literal salary and what it might cost to acquire them in terms of assets. I got Kyle Teige here with me. Kyle, 1 to 10. What was your level of surprise that Karl-Anthony Towns made the All-Star team?
11. Felt like it kind of felt like when you take the alternative route on Google, right? You still get to the same location, but you took a different route. In the famous words of Kevin Garnett, was like, had the pumps, had the Uzis. Like, I was ready to come on here, and I texted you this in the chat earlier, just to unload. Because I was like, if the Wolves don't get a second All-Star, let's word it that way, I was going to lose my mind, because I've done this. I've covered this team with you for 7 years. I've been a fan since I was a baby. And every year, the Wolves are bad. Good teams get rewarded. And that, 2 players from the top team, 3 players, the Atlanta Hawks' infamous starting lineup got to play in the All-Star game. So for a team that's been in first place for 75, 80 days since the 1st of November, pretty much almost every day, excluding a handful that OKC bounced in, they deserve to have at least more than one. So Ant was a shoo-in. Congratulations to him. Speaking of shoo-in, it's a year since you and I kind of broke the news about his shoe, and now he's got the best basketball shoe on the market. But a 2-time All-Star for the kid. He's 22. That's obviously a no-brainer. But yeah, I was like, Rudy has to make it. He's the best defensive player on the best defensive team in the best team in the West. So I was shocked he didn't make it. But then you look at what Karl's doing. We talked about this just last week, right? His month of January. I don't know. And I'll ask you because you're smarter than I am. I don't know if January 2024 was Karl's best month of basketball he's ever played, but it was damn near close. So for him to make it again is fantastic. Congratulations to him. How many times has he made it now? Do you know off the top of your head?
That.
Someone in the chat.
Three,
he's made it more than once. But I mean, it's a big thing. And
3.
Again, it's at the end of the day, the best team, the team that has been the best in the West through 50-some games, through the first 4 months, is the Minnesota Timberwolves. They get 2 guys in the All-Star game. Real 4. Entries.
That says 4. My bad.
4. Okay, thanks, Tyler.
This is his 4th. Yes.
But it's not like, what did Ant say today at shoot around? It's not like the fake back in Adam Silver picks you. These were real coaches' picks to get in. Those 2 have been 2 of the 12 best players in the West all season. Congratulations to them, and congratulations to the organization. That's a big deal. 4th time, I think, in franchise history that they've had 2 All-Stars represent the team.
I wasn't expecting Karl-Anthony Towns to be an All-Star, because for me, I was in the camp pretty firmly of 2 All-Stars. I said this morning, not like I was really ranking it, but I thought Rudy was as deserving as anyone on the Wolves, and but what me and Britt talked about this morning, and I took some more time to dig into today or think about more. I thought Karl-Anthony Towns' case was how good he's been in the games when Ant was bad, and I think even last night is a great a great example of that, where Ant just didn't have the juice, as he hasn't 5, 6, 7 times this season. Karl's been, in my mind this morning, I was talking about, I'm like, I just feel like Karl's been really good in those bad Ant games. I looked it up this morning, or this afternoon, and Basketball Reference, it just is like game score.
Mm-hmm.
For a player, just kind of like ranks the quality of their game. So I just went to Ant's 5 worst games of the season, and it was at Orlando, at Memphis, at Dallas, at Phoenix, and then last night against Dallas. And I looked at those games, what Ant did and what Cat did. So the Orlando game, Ant's worst of the season, according to that ranking. Ant had 6, 4, and 3. He shot 2 for 7 from the field. That was the game where Karl had the big dunk on Mo Wagner. Cat had 28, 6, and 5 in that game. He was 11 for 19 from the field, 5 for 5 from 3, led the team in scoring. The Memphis game, Ant scores 0. It's that game where he re-aggravates his hit. So it wasn't necessarily a bad Ant game, but you didn't have, you didn't have Ant that game. Carl has 24, 7 and 5. Again, leads the team in scoring 2 for 3. The Dallas game, Ant scores only 9 points, has 9, 2, and 11. Cat in that game leads the starters in scoring with 21 points, has 17 rebounds, 2 assists. The Phoenix game, everybody kind of stunk, but Carl again. Ant was bad in that game, the Phoenix back-to-back one, but Carl leads his team in scoring 25, 7 and 2, 10 of 17 from the field. And then yesterday, Ant didn't really have the juice. He had 9, 5, and 5. Cat leads the team in scoring 29, 9, and 4. So if you just take those 5 games, Ant's 5 worst games of the season, Carl's averages in those games are 25.4 points per game, 9.2 rebounds, 3.6 assists, shooting 55% from 3, which are almost across the board his exact same numbers as the regular season, with even better 3-point shooting. And if you think about it, that's what Carl's supposed to be kind of on this team. That to consistently be able to do that, I think that's really delivering on what the job is. That's just the role of a number 2, right? Is coming up and being number 1 when you have to be that. I don't think Carl's numbers or even just eye test night to night this season has screamed all-star to me. But it's stuff like that. It's how good the defense was at the beginning of the year. Remember how, for the first month of the season, the defense was better with Rudy off the floor than when Rudy was on the floor. Yeah. And it was really a product of Cat and Oz were doing a good job there. But I think about that November run, and Carl was just doing all those wall-ups at the rim. He was really active defensively. I think the defense has slipped a little bit. I was thinking about that too. I was like, it's kind of slipped since Christmas, right? He just hasn't quite had the same defensive zip. But the game right before Christmas, I think it was the 23rd against the Kings, that's when he missed that game with his knee. I think he's kind of had some, wear and tear and been playing through that over the course of the last month. But those are really the things that I think sell the Karl Anthony Towns All-Star above just the counting numbers. And in addition to being the number 1, is stepping up in the areas when the 2 other best players are either not on the floor or not playing well. Karl Anthony Towns has actually done that really, really consistently this season. And to that end, you can't really make a strong argument against a second player making the All-Star team on the team that's the number 1 team in the West. So, yeah, props to Cat.
Yeah, and there's a Rudy discussion I kind of want to have. You've done a pretty good job this week with Britt and everyone else, but I was reading the press release from Wolves PR. Ant and Carl kind of also finished. This is, to me, the All-Star game and the All-Star nominations are the first 50 games of the season, right? I've seen some weird analysis about national writers talking about who they like most in a playoff series or career stuff. It's like, guys, this is 50 games. What are we doing? This is who is playing the best so far throughout the end of January. In the month of January, Carl finished with 435 total points, and Ant had 420 total points. January 2024 will go down as the only month in franchise history in which 2 players scored 400 or more points. I don't know what to do with that, but it's a cool stat. But they both kind of finished this chapter of the season strong. They both deserve it. Back to Rudy. I think there's a case that Rudy should have made it as well. That you could have.
Okay, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to say right here that we have to start with who does he get it over? You can make the case that Rudy Gobert should be an All-Star, but it has to come with it does, dude.
No. I was going to say, as long as everyone in this chat and listening on Friday is just a Timberwolves fan, I'll answer the question. Okay. But if this gets aggregated out there, I don't want to just leave me alone. I don't know, Steph Curry, his team's in 10th, right? I know the big names I'm going to pull from this, people are going to lose their mind. But the one thing about the Rudy Gobert conversation, again, maybe it's best that the 31-year-old most important player on the team right now, right? We've kind of agreed that it's Rudy, or we said last week he's the most valuable player on the team right now. That he gets to rest. Just send him to another hole in Oregon and let him hang out with this cat. But I was really not loving the conversation or the discourse about how, no one wants to watch Rudy play in the All-Star game because he's a defensive player. I don't give 2 bleeps about that at all. Because Jimmy Butler had a big campaign and a big push just a year ago. got to the game, and then just made a mockery of it by playing 2 minutes. Okay? This isn't about, if you just want to put the most exciting players in, just put Zion against Wemby, 48 minutes, and see which one doesn't get hurt. Okay? This should be an award. And if you're like, well, I don't think Rudy's that exciting. This is also the stuff we talk about when it gets to award season, or when we talk about these people in general, like Dane Moore, top 20 podcast, 6 out of the last 12 months. Like, we talk about Rudy Gobert, 8-time All-Star, Ant, 2-time, like, this stuff matters. So to make up these weird things about how, Rudy can't shoot threes, they don't want him in the All-Star game, that's a farce to me. Again, best player, or the best defensive player on the best defense in the West. To your point, yes. Who are you going to pull out? I thought they actually did a pretty good job. Like, I get LeBron and AD getting in there. I think you got to have 1 or 2 Clippers. But, like, if I'm a Kings fan right now, I know they're mad. Or, like, Şengün, Charlie Sheen, like, winning. It's about winning. It's always been about winning in the past. So just because the Timberwolves now are winning, don't change up. Keep that same energy. And I'm sorry to Sabonis. I'm sorry to Fox. But under no circumstances did those guys deserve to make it over Karl and Ant. And I think because Rudy has done so much winning and changed this culture, if you're a 9th or 10th place team in the West, I would have taken Rudy. But that's my case.
Yeah. No, so it's just the people he would need to, replace are like Steph or Paul George, or, the argument objectively, if we remove the Wolves stuff, the person Rudy got quote unquote snubbed by was his teammate.
Yeah.
Like, if Rudy was going to make it, then Karl's out. Like, that's the answer. And that's okay. Two guys, could have been Karl, could have been Rudy. All three maybe would have been kind of pushing it, just given how awesome the West is. But I don't say that in Rudy wasn't deserving. If it was me, my ranking would be Rudy is the most all-star worthy player on the Minnesota Timberwolves. That's my opinion. Watching this team night in, night out. I know a lot of people, don't share that. I don't mean that as shade to Ant or Cat. It's my opinion, given the dominance of the defense this season. And I really respect the hell out of Rudy's night-to-night professionalism, consistency, all that sort of stuff. Maybe that's not what the All-Star Game's about. That's kind of the way I view it. But at the end of the day, I don't think we can be too, there's not a lot to be frustrated with here. 2 Wolves got in. 2 Wolves, I think, deserve to be in. What about just, Ant quickly? We should acknowledge this is his first time being voted in initially. Obviously, last year he was an injury replacement. He deserves a hell of a lot of credit for this team too. And it's easier to point to Rudy, right? Like, he's clearly the most important defensive player on the best defensive team. The Wolves are an average offensive team, but Ant is clearly the most important offensive player on that team. And so you kind of have to do the Delta thing there, right? Like, what are the Wolves offensively if Anthony Edwards wasn't on this team? Particularly given some of the spacing issues they do, that Ant is still able to be putting up the numbers that he does in an offensive setup that probably isn't most advantageous to him, that he's still kind of a no-brainer all-star in pretty much everything I read from people I respect, and the way, where he made the team, right? So major credit to him. And at 22 years old to have 2 all-star appearances, again, in a loaded Western Conference. Yeah. Just any Ant thoughts quick?
Yeah. I know he's had a couple stinkers lately, just kind of coasted in some of these bad games, but it comes back to he has great numbers for being 22, and I don't think he gets in if you swap the Wolves and the Warriors record, right? The Warriors are 20-24, and they're in 12th in the West, right? The Rockets, like, I like watching Şengün. I think he's a really good player. I saw, the stat muses of the world putting up his numbers against Karl's, and it's like, man, one of those guys is playing, again, to Karl's point, we didn't even mention this, his defense has been really good this season too. They're on a winning team, and to me, I know some people don't agree, but to me, it is kind of about winning, because it's a mid-season accolade. It's not all NBA. It's not, a title or a ring, whatever. It's who's been playing the best 50 games. And for the most part, Ant has been really, really good again in his 4th season. It is kind of funny, right? Like, the Karl and Ant thing for September and October and November, you and I said Ant is this team's floor and Karl is this team's ceiling. That's switched. to me in the last month. Like Carl is the floor now. You know what to expect on a 50-degree night against a JV Dallas Mavericks team, and when he gives you those highs, that's when this team looks like a real, I can't believe I'm going to say it, like title contender. So he deserved it. Carl deserved it. And I saw some people in the chat here on YouTube. Again, thanks for tuning in. If you can, subscribe to the channel. But maybe Rudy makes it as an injury replacement, right? Like I'm sure there'll be one or two in the East. There'll be one or two maybe in the West. So that'll be the next level of this. But congrats to Ant, congrats to Carl. And the only other one that I think is going to make it is probably going to be Chris Finch.
Yeah, that's true. We will. I guess that comes down to what happens in tomorrow's game, Friday's game against Orlando, right? That determines it.
The way I have it figured out, and Alan Horton was on this, but I think they have 2 games at home, Magic on Friday, Rockets on Sunday. Dane will be at both, but I think they just got to win one of those games because they have an OKC tiebreaker, and then it doesn't matter about Denver because Mike Malone and his staff can't rep it 2 years in a row. So, shameless plug, but over at Flagrant House today, we had Jim Pete on, and he came out and said, what everyone's been thinking, it would be a really big honor for Finch and his staff to represent the West in Indianapolis. And I think Finch, despite maybe wanting to take a couple of days to, go somewhere warm, I think he would really feel good about doing that. So they got to win one more in the next 2. Ant said today at shoot around, he really wants to get Finch in there as well. So could be a 3-headed monster going to Indianapolis in a couple of weeks.
For that Orlando game, I want to make sure to plug this one more time before the game tomorrow. We're going to give away 2 tickets to the Wolves game against the Magic tomorrow. And the way you enter for that is be a Patreon subscriber for us, which helps support this show. And many of you have supported the show for a long time. That way, this is our way of kind of trying to give back. We have, again, 2 tickets for the game tomorrow against the Magic. If you are a Patreon subscriber, just go to the messages on there. Let us know that you are available, and we'll pick someone at random for those 2 tickets. And if you want to become a Patreon subscriber, it costs $5 a month. And you can do that. That's down below in the show notes. Or you can just go to patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA. That's up on the screen there too. And just let us know that you are available for that game, and we will give away 2 tickets. Also, today's show is brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company. We tell you about Falling Knife all the time for Wolves games. I do hear that Fridays or the weekend games are kind of the most fun to attend there. They're pretty, it's a pretty full house and everyone's into the games. It's what people are there for on a Friday night. Obviously, you have that for the Magic game tomorrow night. So if you're looking for a place to go, check that out. And then they do have a Super Bowl party next Sunday. Maybe you're thinking about a little over a week away what you're going to do for the Super Bowl. If you don't have plans for that, again, Falling Knife is an option there. They're doing it all you can eat promotion. It's $50. They got a whole bunch of different things from Rectangle Pizza. I should find that here, but it's pizza, it's wings, it's all sorts of sides and stuff. That's all included. Plus, you can get a pitcher of beer or 2 pints is also included in that $50. So go to Falling Knife BC on Instagram. The link there that they have you can sign up for your tickets there. Again, that's Falling Knife Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis. Ready to do some trade deadline stuff, Kyle?
Yeah, you know what? Actually, let's give one. I just want to give, in case he doesn't make it, as an injury replacement. I was just thinking about this while I was thinking about pizza. Shout out to Rudy Gobert. Because he probably, the more I think about it, I can't imagine they're going to take a 7'3" center and throw him in as an injury replacement. It'll, be a guard or something. Like I said, the Kings didn't have any representation, and they've had a good season. But it is kind of funny, right, or ironic, that the guy that has come in and helped promote winning more than really anyone I can imagine since Kevin Garnett was here, in Rudy Gobert, is the guy that kind of helped send his 2 teammates to Indianapolis. Because, again, the numbers Ant puts up, the number Carls puts up, doesn't really mean much if they're not winning games. I think if they were the 6th seed, there's no way in hell they have 2 guys. And as Sacramento,
you might be the Kings, yeah, right?
Yeah, they might not have anyone. 0. So thank you, Rudy Gobert, for sending your teammates to Indianapolis. But yeah, no, let's go into trade season. We're a week away from the trade deadline. We're starting to see. It's always funny, right? It's always about that week before the deadline when you start to see people that you've never heard of before have sources. That's always a good time. So someone who actually does have some sources and knows how this all works. Where do you want to go?
Yeah, so we're going to take questions from people. Maybe if you have specific trades and stuff, we can get into that of, does this make sense? But I think the place to start, particularly with the team in the Wolves position, asset poor, right, is to establish what they have to offer, right? And the Wolves are asset poor because of the Gobert trade. They cannot trade any first round picks, right? We know that. Not that they don't have their pick this year, right? It's just the every other year thing they gave those all away in the Gobert trade. So what they do have is technically kind of 4 seconds, really more like 3 that they can offer. They have Memphis's second round pick this summer, the 2024 second of Memphis, which is a really good second. That's probably going to be like the 35th pick. That has some fringe first round pick value, and it's immediate, right? Not a great draft, maybe, but as far as seconds go, really good second. In 2025, they have Utah's second. That's fine. Maybe middle of the pack. Minotti type player would be the, what was Josh Minot 45th pick. And then their third second is not a great one. It is the least favorable in 2026 of Indiana, Miami, and San Antonio. So I don't know. Maybe that's like the 48th pick in 2026. It's their least valuable of their 3 seconds. If you want to say they have 4 seconds to offer, it's the 2029 one, their own. But that one they can't trade because you know how the 2029 first in the Gobert trade is top 5 protected?
I was going to ask you this, yeah.
So that turns into a second round pick. If for somehow the Wolves in 2029 get a top 5 pick and it's protected, that becomes the second round pick. So the Wolves can't trade that second without amending. They need to trade something with Utah to amend that. I don't even know how that will work. So I really think we should be thinking about this as the Wolves having 3 seconds that they can offer. They also have 2 swaps. They have a swap this year. That's pretty much nothing, right? They're like, I don't know.
6 months ago, that might have had a little value, right?
Exactly.
And now every time
but
I
now
look
it's
at
like
mock drafts, it's like they're the 29th team and they're drafting some bench warmer from Marquette. But anyway.
Yeah, well, it's just like they could swap with like Boston. They have the 29th pick, like Boston. Yeah, you could move up 1 pick. So pretty much nothing for that's not an asset. The 2024 first round pick swap. 2028 first round pick swap, that's something to add in there. So I would say in total, the way to think about it is the Wolves have 1 really good second, 2 mediocre seconds, and a 2028 first round pick swap. Not a ton to be able to attach to salary going out in a trade there. Good players have been acquired for that much. There's times where 3 seconds, 4 seconds get you, a real piece. I don't know. Not that Jay Crowder really worked, but that was kind of like Milwaukee did that. There's Rui Hachimura, right? Wasn't that like 3 or 4 seconds last year for the Lakers? That's kind of what the Wolves have to offer. And then you need to attach that onto outgoing salary. And we kind of know the main characters that could potentially be traded there. Kyle Anderson, the most expensive, $9.2 million expiring contract. Shake Milton, $5 million expiring contract. Troy Brown Jr., $4 million expiring contract. Wendell Moore Jr. has 2 years and these are all including this year. So 2 years and $5 million left on Wendell Moore's contract, about $2.5 million matching for this year. Jordan McLaughlin, $2.3 million. Those are kind of your matching salaries, right? And then you get to Josh Minot and Leonard Miller as out of rotation assets that I think would be a real asset to add to that.
A real
somewhat,
asset,
yeah.
In the sense that they would be enticing. I mean, we're all watching the G League stuff, right? And I will say, I actually can't believe I'm saying this on a real podcast. I watched the whole G League Ignite versus Iowa Wolves game last night.
Okay.
I would just like to apologize to the listeners about me being so upfront about letting Josh and Leonard play in this rotation right now. I'm pretty excited about them long term. I do not think watching them play defense that they are ready to step in and help man the best defense in the league. But yeah, they're real assets. The problem is, and this is what you were going to say, they make no money. So when you're trying to balance out the finances, these guys make a little north of $1 million every year. You're not going to be able to do much with that, trying to bring in salary to make it match.
Right. Well, and I think that's a factor here too. And like, you can get to like a pretty decent number if you do like a 3-for-1 or a 4-for-1, and we can start talking about 15, 18, $20 million players. If you do that, like, it would work on the trade machine, but you need to then replace those roster spots with other contracts that would add money to the Wolves' books, which normally wouldn't be the end of the world. But the Wolves are $2.3 million away from the luxury tax, right? Mm-hmm. And we know they're not going, or not know, but they have a serious incentive to not be in a luxury tax this luxury tax team this season, because next season they certainly will, and probably going forward, you want to avoid that repeater tax. So that's a variable in something that it might give you the green check on the trade machine, but you got to kind of think about a little bit in terms of kind of balancing that out. I just like wrote down, it's like, all right, like Landry Shamet is a player that I think is I'm interested in, a movement shooter or something like that. He makes $10.25 million. You go, all right, like you could probably do like Milton and Troy Brown Jr. plus a second or two, and that would work. But Milton and Troy Brown Jr., 9 million, 10.25 million. You've added $1.25 million to that, and you just don't have a lot of space here, particularly if you want to get a buyout guy. That's going to go against your luxury tax space there as well. So I just want to establish that, like, it's not that they can't make a trade. I think they will make a trade. It's just limited assets, limited space to work with, and, limited roster resources to be able to throw in there. So I think that's just the blanket where they're at right now. So
we're shopping at grocery outlet and not Whole Foods kind of thing, right? And I will say, since it's about a year removed,
nobody here knows what is grocery outlet like a thing.
Oh, that's the thing out here. I think it's like where basically all the stale bread goes. But if you're like, hey, I want some cheap bread, on the 1 year anniversary kind of removed, those assets you talked about, right? Imagine those assets if like Tim Conley doesn't squeeze out a bunch of second round picks in the D'Lo trade, right? Not only did they get Mike Conley, who has changed all of our lives, and Nikhil, who has been obviously just not just a throw-in, but a prize in and of himself, but to get those 3 seconds, and then they spin one off to get Leonard Miller in last year's draft. But yeah, they have limited assets. And I also think, because you just mentioned everything that is available, it's important to at least acknowledge, and again, just acknowledge, not saying I want to do it, Mike Conley is an expiring contract, right? At what, like 20-some million? And then Naz Reid, right, just as a enticing piece. Kyle Anderson, obviously, you said is expiring, and then just named All-Star Karl-Anthony Towns. So to start at the top, they're not going to trade Karl. Like, that would be blasphemy. What you're doing right now, you finally have figured out the two bigs and all that stuff. They're probably not going to trade Naz, right? I mean, that would be kind of also blasphemy.
Yeah, it's all such a weird thing, right? Like, it would be completely unprecedented to break up a number one seat. But I think what you're doing at here is is there a bigger trade out there that happens and we go, we didn't even talk about that. We didn't even think about that. Like, how does that come together? And you can make cases for that. Like, the word was entering the season is a year from now, one of Karl, Naz, or Rudy aren't going to be on the team. Obviously, it's worked significantly better than the optimistic projection. And does that rule that out? And that now you're for sure bringing them all back next year? Probably. Or, or not trading them right now in the middle of the season. Yeah, but it's a question given the financial landscape going forward. Even somebody like Jaden McDaniels, if something crazy happens, the Wolves are going to be giving up, something crazy there. So you're right to not totally brush over that. I think it's just the place we probably should be aiming is more at these like $8 to $10 million players that you can get there, with trading the Kyle Anderson, Troy Brown Jr.'s and the Shake Miltons and the limited assets that you do have. But that's good to bring up.
And again, Mike too. But again, Mike, you're going to not only try to keep healthy this season. I thought he looked really good last night coming back from his hamstring injury against the Mavs. But also, 4 months ago was forecasting to the summer and like, okay, you're not going to be able to keep both Kyle and Mike. I think that question has answered itself in who is more important. I think there's another fun 90-minute podcast later this spring about just the Mike Conley thing, and how much it's going to cost to keep him. Also, too, if I'm Mike, and I never want to dig into anyone's pockets, but like Mike Conley might not find a better situation as his season, his career is kind of coming to an end. He wants to just win a title than Minnesota. So maybe he takes a discount. But for now,
can I say something related to that?
Yeah. Are you negotiating for him?
No, just like if you look at the cap space teams for next season, like
that's like 6.
Yeah, and they all stink except for Philly. Like just
and
whatever.
they're not.
Go to Spotrac. It's look at it and go through and ask yourself. I'm not saying I think Mike Conley is a $20 million, $25 million player. Like, but what team is going to offer Mike Conley that has cap space available $20 to $25 million other than Philly? And I don't think that would be on. I don't know, but I can't imagine that's what Philly's main plan is. Maybe that's a backup to the backup plan for Philly if they can't make something happen with all the cap space they do have. They also have Tyrese Maxey. Like, does that work? I
might
don't
not have cap space a week from now if they make a move to trade for a third star that blows that up. So
it's just like the Mike Conley market is going to be interesting in the summertime because you need to have cap space so as to be able to sign him to over a $12-13 million mid-level exception contract, right? That's that's how you need cap space or an exception to be able to do it. Could be a sign and trade, something like that. I mean, but there are market factors, I think it's fair to say, pushing Mike Conley to stay in Minnesota outside of all the basketball stuff and the importance we know that he is, and the sense you get with Mike that he would want to be playing for a contender. It's like, okay, cool. Like Charlotte can offer you 20. Like is Mike Conley? I would just be shocked to see him go to a team that doesn't have a real chance at winning there. So when people say like, I could see Mike taking a discount, I think that's where the discount comes from. He's not going to turn down $25 million from another contender to take half of that with Minnesota, right? That we're talking about a lot of money. I don't think he would.
I see your point though. I'm just being weird, but like maybe like there's the non part of it too. When I got to talk to Mike, like he's got a family, right? He's got a couple kids. Like I think he really enjoys. I mean, they were ready to make Utah their home, right? Outside of having a place closer to Ohio State where he's from. I think he really enjoys Minnesota. You guys aren't, from what I hear, you don't have snow anymore. It just never snows, so that's pretty cool. So I think there's all those pieces are going to, again, this is a trade deadline thing, but you have to bring up Mike's name because you're listing all the expiring contracts, and he actually has, I mean, if you just dangled Mike Conley at the trade deadline, that's one of the sexiest pieces you can do. He's a really good point guard on a really big number that expires, but again, he is kind of the straw that stirs the drink. So it all comes down to the other side of that coin that we were talking about in September, Kyle or Mike. We know Mike is probably good. Now, do you risk trading Kyle Anderson? I know his Q score in the fan base and his performances late has not been as great, but I also know that there's a lot of advanced defensive stats that show he's really, really important. If you lose a guy like Jaden again to foul trouble or he punches another wall, who do you throw in there to guard bigger wings? And then just his ability to kind of play backup points. So I don't know, take it wherever you want, but I think it's important, like you just did, to outline what do they have in the cupboard to go shopping with.
Yeah, and I want to get into some of the potential buys here rather than cutting into the middle of that. Let's just grab our second ad break here. Sorry, I need to find that. Today's show is also brought to you by Your Home Improvement Company. Again, another local sponsor that's helping us out, and we want you to consider, if you are considering a home improvement project, to consider Your Home Improvement Company. For the month of February, they are offering a deal of 30% off entire bathroom projects. They can do the installations in 1 day or less. It's a worry-free installation backed by material and labor warranties, always zero interest, zero down till 2025. Also, they have a Windows deal where it's buy two, get two free. Again, maybe that's something that you are going to be needing to do. That happens when you have a home. And we would just like you to at least consider Your Home Improvement Company if that is if that is a need that you have, they're great to us, and we would love to generate some business for them as well. So that's your home improvement company, where it's your home made better. You can call them locally at 952-243-3502 or go to yourhomeimprovement.com. Kyle, we'll hold off on prize picks here for a second because I want to keep going with some of these names.
Slop. Let's get it.
We'll take some from the chat, some trades that people want to throw in there. We'll answer those specifically, but I just want to hit on some names. Again, I'm looking at that like $8 to $10 million range, and one name that sticks out to me is DeLon Wright, who's in Washington. I think a lot of people, when you look at Washington, you think about Tyus Jones. We can talk about Tyus as well. But DeLon is on, I don't know why I called him by his first name like I know him. DeLon Wright is on a 1-year, $8.2 million expiring contract. He's 31 years old. He is a point guard, more of like a mediocre shooter, not a problem there. Really, where he's made his bones in the NBA is as a defensive player. Again, I use this type of name, one, because I think it's realistic. And dude, like it's not the sexy one, but this is what we're talking about. We're talking about this type of player. I actually think DeLon Wright's a little bit underrated. Would really help an already great defense. What does DeLon Wright do for you?
It kind of makes sense. I don't know if you and I talked about it on the pod, but I just keep coming back to, we've done this enough. I don't think we need to rehash it, but just the idea of backup point guard, bucket getter or movement shooter, right? Like we pretty much know the front court is pretty well set with Carl and Rudy and Nas. And again, as you get into an actual playoff series, you're just going to cut down your rotation anyway. Finch isn't going to play more than 8 guys. So I've seen enough from Jordan McLaughlin that in a pinch you could throw him in. But again, I would imagine he DNPs in the playoffs because you're probably just going to play Mike a lot. Yeah. And then you're going to have Nikhil do some second.
DeLon Wright's very Nikhil-y.
Yeah, so it would be insurance. I kind of made this comp to Phil the other day that, if Mike is so important, Mike Conley, to this team, that's kind of like in fantasy football when you had Saquon Barkley. It's like, well, I don't really care who his handcuff is because his handcuff is not going to be Saquon Barkley, right? So like, if you want to talk about trades for Matt Breida, like it is what it is. So I don't know if there's any point guard out there that's going to be able to fill Mike's shoes if he's out. But DeLon Wright is serviceable and a vet. Has been around. So I'm okay with it. The number matches, like you said, it's probably an easy swap. I doubt Washington would be asking for too much in that sort of a deal. Just, maybe couple seconds to get
in the range of the limited assets that the Wolves have.
The bread at Groeschel. But since we're on the Wizards,
can I read something on DeLon Wright?
Yeah, absolutely. Is it a text from him?
No, I did. I texted an executive that works for a non-Wolves team about DeLon Wright. Because he'd mentioned him before as one of the most underrated players. So I logged out in my head. I'm like, hey, I've heard DeLon Wright. He goes, he would be great. Solid upgrade over the current backup situation, would give another sure hand to Conley, and he is such a great defender. Neutral source, I don't know. I mean, I think the DeLon Wright acquisition is better than we might think if that ends up happening. It's more than maybe the name is worth. But to your point, we're talking about the 3 different buckets, right? The backup point guard, the bucket getter, and the movement shooter. DeLon Wright fits mostly into that backup point guard bin, which I think is the least important, least valuable of the 3. I'm more into the movement shooter idea. Do you want to do one of those first, or did you want to get into
no, that's it. I just looked up 36% this year from 3 for DeLon Wright, 31 years old. Would be a nice, I know we're into this 40 minutes of a podcast and we're doing a big trade primer and we're starting with DeLon Wright. I know that's probably not sexy, but again, almost every other year you've done this, it's been inverse, right? Like you're tuning in on a Thursday and none of your favorite players on your favorite team make the All-Star team. Your team sucks and you're trying to find this big trade. The Wolves are the inverse now. They're good. They have their rotation. They're not going to, you could make a case that whoever they trade for might not even play, right? Like they might have if they don't trade Kyle, for example, you pretty much know their 8-man rotation, whether you agree with it or not, come playoff time with the starters, Nikhil, Naz, and Kyle. So DeLon Wright would be insurance for Mike. Obviously, he'd be another defender. He could shoot the ball a little bit. But again, to the backup point guard thing or whatever, I've seen a ton of people in the chat. I want whatever a more proven, not going to stab me in the back, break my feelings like Jalen Noel. I just want a guy. I think this team has always been a guard short. Just another guy that can just, they need 8 points in the third quarter, and Carl has 4 fouls, and Ant just does, they're doubling Ant. Like, who else on this team can just go get me an 8-0 run? Yeah. And I've got some guys, but I'll defer back to you.
Well, if you give me a bucket getter. Is that again, what you're talking? Are you talking about bucket getter, or are you talking about 8 points from the 3-point line?
Like no, like a bucket. Like I don't know, man. I like Lonnie Walker's story. I saw again he had some cool quotes. He's out in Brooklyn right now.
Yeah, I saw that.
He kind of had some. This is really deep stuff here, but he had some quotes that kind of reminded me of Nikhil, and just changing. He's still a young guy. I don't know if he's 24, 25. Got drafted by the Spurs. Has kind of bounced around. He's on a minimum, and he brought that up in this post game conference. Like, I want a minimum. Like, I'm fighting for my life and my career. And the sappy part of me, I love guys like that. But I also think watching some Nets games recently, he can fill it up for a little bit. He might not play in game 1 or game 2, but if you're tied 1-1 and you go now on the road to a Kings or something, and the defense just isn't, traveling for that game, you just need to outscore him, outshoot him. I think Lonnie Walker's a good fit. He can space the floor. He can put the ball on the ground a little bit. I always joke that this team doesn't have enough dribblers. So he would just kind of fit all those little things. And again, he also has that added chip on his shoulder of someone who probably wants to kind of prove that he can be a good teammate and be a contributor to a good team.
Let's talk about Tyus.
Yeah, okay.
So Tyus is $14 million.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's obstacle 1 that requires the inclusion of Kyle Anderson pretty much, I would say. But maybe, and I don't know, like, is Kyle Anderson viewed as, like, if you trade him to Washington in that, can they then flip Kyle Anderson elsewhere to get something positive back? I would assume so. Maybe get a second or 2 back for him from somebody else. Maybe I don't know. But he would be in there, and now you're including one of probably Shake or Troy Brown Jr. Let's say it's Kyle, Shake Milton, and all 3 of those seconds. Would you do that for Tyus Jones?
Before I answer if I would do that, this is the one side of the NBA trade machine that our friend Sachin Gupta had helped create that is kind of a downside for fans. It's cool if you can make a trade work in the trade machine, but the Wizards aren't on that same URL. So why would the Wizards do that, right? Yeah. I mean, I talked to that one friend I have out here at the Blazers, but I would be just shocked if Tyus gets moved, if he doesn't get moved for like a first. A first is just way more valuable than a bunch of expiring contracts, even if Washington could then flip Kyle or, do that type of stuff. I'll go back to you. I would do that if I was the Wolves, because you secure really good Mike Conley insurance. Now, again, I've seen people in the chat say, well, they got to get their point guard of the future. If Mike decides to re-sign this summer for 2 or 3 years, is Tyus going to re-sign? Like, are you going to trade every remaining asset for a Tyus Jones rental? Yeah. I know he's from here. I know all the fans love him. I just don't see it. Would you throw Leonard Miller in there, who's probably the most enticing of the young guys that the Wolves have right now?
Very Wizardsy, right? Like, yeah, I think if they're doing a Thunder thing or whatever, yeah.
I mean, Leonard Miller fills it up. I think he had 29 and 19 last night. Doesn't play a lot of defense, so him and Jordan Poole will be Wizards that's the Wizards roster right now. So would you do that? I would make Leonard Miller untouchable. That's a whole other conversation.
Come on, dude.
The amount of money he makes over the next 4 years is like nothing. And if you're going to try to thread this needle these next couple of years, and you don't want to trade Carson, you're going to need cheap talent. Like, you do have to keep one eye on the summer. So, long-winded. I love Tyus's game. I don't know who Tyus could defend in a playoff series. I don't think he's had a lot of great games. Again, is that because he's playing with some of the lowest IQ basketball players in the league? Maybe. But I'm out on it, because that is pushing all of your remaining chips into the middle for someone who I'm not sure what the fit is. Like I want Mike on the court every
it's
minute.
It's an undefined fit because
Mm-hmm.
you don't know what the Mike variable is there, and then you factor in, you got to give up all or most of your remaining assets. Do you need to put that pick swap, that 28 pick swap in there? I don't know. We don't know what the price on these are, but if we are saying the price is a protected first round pick, well, the Wolves don't have that. Does 3 seconds, a 28 pick swap, and which could very well be nothing, and Leonard Miller, is that the equivalent? Yeah, maybe. And I kind of dismissed the Tyus Jones thing out of hand last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever, where I was just like, I just don't feel like they have enough to be able to get it. But what I've learned in this is we don't know what the price tags are necessarily on all these players. I ultimately think Tyus, if I had to guess, gets traded for more than what the Wolves have to offer, but maybe not. And if not, then you can open up that conversation. For me, it's not as intriguing because, again, the backup point guard idea archetype is just not it's not on the top of my list.
And you said something really smart earlier about everyone knows the Wolves' financial situation because everyone listens to this pod, and it's going to be something we talk about for 6 months this summer.
6 years.
A lot, but this, talking to people, right? We talk about this all the time offline. There are so many other teams that are running into financial situations starting this summer. There are only 6 teams that really have cap space. So if you trade for Tyus, like I said earlier, Mike Conley, it just makes too much sense for Mike and his family and where he's at in his career to somehow take a little discount and stay with this team that's a contender. Tyus Jones, if one of those bad teams you talked about that have a bunch of money are like, hey, take $460 and come be our starting point guard, now you're trading every asset you have for a guy that, in an ideal world isn't part of your 5 or 6 man rotation. Yeah. Again, because you have Nikhil as well. Mm-hmm. So that's why, again, I think Tyus is, to me, again.
Yeah, we should say Tyus has changed so much
yes.
from the player he was when he was here. He's shooting over 40% from 3 this year. And the biggest change in his game I've noticed from watching him over the years is he's got a floater game now. He can do stuff in the middle of the floor offensively. So he's got more to his offensive game than assist to turnover ratio now. And if you haven't seen a lot of the Grizzlies or the Wizards or whatever,
good job.
That's what's that's what's changed. My favorite movement shooter, or not favorite, but I think a realistic one, given the team that he plays for, the price tag, all those sort of things, is Alec Burks.
Yeah,
he's been
mine too.
Over 40% from 3 each of the last 4 years. He isn't a guy that can really microwave it. And I mean, I happened to be watching a Pistons game this year where he made 7 threes. And obviously it's not a bankable thing from Alec Burks, like night to night at all, but he can do that. And what I'm thinking about in acquisitions is a guy who I feel confident could play in the rotation in the playoffs and maybe not win you a game. Could he win you a half? Could Alec Burks be on the Wolves and make 3 or 4 threes in the first or whatever in 2 quarters of a playoff game? I think so. He's got that skill set to be able to do so. I think he's 32 now. He's getting up there, but having watched a handful of Pistons games this year, it looks like the player I've seen going back to Utah and New York before he was in Detroit there too. I think he's a little more like awesome catch and shoot than he is movement shooter, which we kind of talk about as the guys that hunt space. Landry Shamet is more of that, like searching for the place on the perimeter where I can run to and catch it, or in one dribble, like get that off. And I think that the Malik Beasley, that's probably the most intuitive one for the Wolves. That type of player I think would be great on this team, and I think this team could probably afford a Malik Beasley level defender, though. Every so often you see a nice little hustle Malik Beasley clip that comes out.
You watched the Blazers game last night too. He was fantastic.
I didn't watch the game. I saw the clips from it on Twitter.
He was fantastic last night in Dame's return to Portland. 2 other things. So again, a lot of my knowledge just comes from talking to you offline. But Alec Burks is actually my number 1 guy. Like, he would be the number 1 person on my targets. Shooting 39% from 3 on his career. Shooting over 40% from 3 each of the last 4 years. And also, you're going to laugh at this, played with Rudy. kind of gets it in Utah, right? He was there in Utah for many years when Rudy was there. So the more Rudy whispers, the better. The more guys that can speak French would be helpful. But he can, I saw someone in the chat say too, like he can kind of do it at all three levels. He can get to the rim a little bit. He can spot up.
He's got a funky little mid-range kind of like turnaround game in there. Like the kind of like a 10-foot mid-range game. I feel like, you know what I'm talking about? Like that sort of deal.
Quick 30, because James in the chat brings up a good point, and this is kind of what I said earlier. There's a chance, not really selling the podcast here, but there's a chance that whoever the Wolves trade for doesn't play.
Well, then they shouldn't trade for him. They shouldn't trade for that player.
Right, exactly.
I don't think, I mean,
but you know
I don't think they'd give up a good amount of those limited assets for a player to be a rental for the rest of this, just a regular season ninth man. You know, or how I would do it is I'm only investing in it if I feel like this player can have a playoff rotation spot and maybe even need to have like the Kyle Anderson spot. Mm-hmm. I like the bandwidth to be able to do it. And maybe that's a player a level up from Alec Burks. Maybe that's Luke Kennard, you know, that you feel that, you know, Luke Kennard makes like $14.5 million. So again, that's probably a Kyle has to be in it situation. And you're like, okay, like, now sucks you lost Kyle for the defensive purposes, but you have Luke Kennard with a real role there available. And maybe now your rotation is 8, right? You scrap the Milton, Brown, McLaughlin minutes and you distribute those bench minutes to Nas, Nikhil, and Luke Kennard there. Like I could get that. There is somewhat of a like, it's not like this team doesn't have needs, but it's hard to just add a player to it and be like, here's 18 minutes, you know, it's a sort of bizarre place that the Wolves are at there.
So no one is closer to the team than you. So can you comment on this for not only me, but everyone listening? Because you make a good point. I think the Wolves will make a trade, but if they make a trade and they expend any sort of asset whatsoever, right? Other than like, if you just flipped Shake Milton for Lonnie Walker, who kind of make the same money or whatever. Now, why would Brooklyn do that if they can find assets elsewhere? But if you invest any asset whatsoever, that player does have to be part of the rotation because you're spending very limited capital to try to make an upgrade.
Yeah, if it's not going to be one of those, then you should just get a buyout guy. Then it's get a buyout guy who.
And I'm sure we'll go. I mean, I don't really want to do buyout stuff today because it's like, but there will be a buyout pod that we'll do. But my question to you is, how interlocked or intertwined do you think Tim Conley is and Chris Finch are, in that if Tim makes a move, you know, he's probably expecting that Finch is going to play him. And if Tim makes a move, Finch is like, good, because I want to play him.
Yeah, no, I mean, I broadly get the sense that it is one of those coaching front office things where it is synergistic. It's not the like these like the GM chooses the players that are on the roster. He's like, all right, now you need to choose amongst them to, you know, to right. So I would think Finch would be involved in anything, which is an interesting wrinkle to the Kyle Anderson element of it. I think even just in the last week or so, Kyle's really moved into the 8th spot in the rotation. Yeah. It started being, even that the Oklahoma City game stood out to me, and for somewhat obvious reasons, right? Of that, the things that Kyle doesn't do well, getting exploited. I think Finch is coming to more grips with the reality of what this Kyle Anderson is. Does that mean he's loosened his grip on his willingness to being cool with trading him or not putting up a fit to not trade him? I would think so. I don't know. Obviously, I haven't talked to him, but there seems to be some logical dots to be able to connect there that maybe Finch would be more willing to let Kyle Anderson go. And I think the front office, just watching what the product is on the floor and seeing what the offensive issues are, you know, they love Kyle Anderson too, but you can understand it's one of those, you know, Kyle Anderson gets traded. It's, you know, the first thing Tim Conley does when he sits down is like, it was so hard to trade Kyle Anderson. We absolutely love Kyle, you know, like and genuinely, you know, like that's what it would, you know, that's what it would be. And then there's the locker room element of it all too, which is, I don't know if it's underrated because we talk about how important it is all the time. But
even last night you were in the locker room. Which thank you for your service, because I can't imagine covering last night's game. That was an abomination. But Nikhil,
Kyle Anderson was wearing a Dennis Rodman shirt.
Well, okay,
I was like, okay, I like you more. But then I was like, has Kyle Anderson become Dennis Rodman?
Okay, that's another segment. But no, Nikhil had some really cool quotes last night. By far, I think my favorite quote on the team right now, just really reflective and stuff. But he was talking about the defense, and he just slipped up and was like, slow-mo's always watching everyone's tendencies. And I know that stuff is not sexy because people just love the stats and the pieces and the assets and stuff. It's just, Kyle is not playing good basketball this year, but
offensively,
what is his value to the locker room? And also, if you trade Kyle, let's just say you do, to me, and this is kind of like a weird parlay of all this stuff, if you trade Kyle, you have to then get a wing. So I don't know if that's a bucket getter or a movement shooter, but because as much as I love Jaden, I've always said that Jaden and Na just defend different types of players. Na is so good, but he is just physically not big enough, I don't think, to guard Kawhi or guard Paul George. So if Jaden falls out or gets into foul trouble and you don't have Kyle, despite his offensive deficiencies, what is your next option? I don't think it can be Troy. Is it Ant? And then you're kind of shifting guys all around. So just something to think about. I'm not even really giving you a take there. It's just the Kyle is kind of the break glass in case of emergency thing for Mike and for Jaden, despite how bad he's been offensively. So I don't know, but I really like going back to Burks. I think Burks is probably really gettable too. I think Detroit would take a couple seconds, shed some contracts, whatever. So trade for Alec Burks.
Let's Cooper. I think you've been flagging.
Yeah,
Cooper in the background. Cooper Carlson, shout out, running our YouTube element of all of this. We can answer some maybe specific questions. I obviously have a couple more names written down here too, but if people want to throw out a specific trade thing, we can get into that as well. Here we have from Brian Hawks, Kennard, McDermott, Trent Jr. Which is most realistic? Would any fill this team's need to improve the offense without sacrificing too much on defense? I think all of those you're making somewhat of a sacrifice defensively, but yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so we talked about Doug McDermott and Flagrant Howls a little bit, and I don't know if you've seen the movie, but it just reminds me of, and Jim even said it on the call last night, this team is defense. This team, that is their bread and butter. That is how they're going to win playoff series, right? Again, they need to get that offense from 19th or 20th to at least league average or, God forbid, top 10. But they make their hay on playing defense. And I just don't know if you can plug in a guy like Doug McDermott at any part of the rotation, because it's like in the movie 300 where they have that goat path. It's like you don't want to have some sort of 4-on-5 thing where it's like that guy we can just pick on. And in the playoffs, when teams just third quarter, fourth quarter just run the same play and abuse the same player, I get the McDermott thing from a shooting aspect, maybe in the buyout market, but if that's your one trade is just go get, this is like a glorified Matt Ryan. As much as I like Matt Ryan, that just doesn't seem like a needle mover to me. I'd rather just lean in on the defense and just hope that Ant and Carl can put up 75 a game in come playoff time.
Yeah, no, that's a question that ties to all of the potential movement shooters,
that's true.
Right?
Yeah,
and I think I'm more in the camp of this team can kind of afford, given how good it is defensively, to survive some of that in bench minutes, right?
Okay.
The bad defender, great shooter guy, I think plays for this team. Doesn't close games, but you live with it. And maybe it's in all the benchy minutes that Gobert's on the floor or whatever, and you hammer home to that player, solid is enough, right? And I think what I always hit with the players who are bad defenders, I feel better about them if they're bigger. And
yeah, that's true.
And McDermott, I'm not saying McDermott is not a good defender, but he does have he has some size to him, whereas Luke Kennard's probably a better defender, or Gary Trent is, but they're smaller, in terms of physicality and just overall length, height, whatever. So I don't know. I'm just I think Malik Beasley would be awesome on this team. And I do not think Malik Beasley is an awesome defender, but can you get a player that's doing what Malik Beasley is being asked to do defensively for the Bucks? He's part of the reason why their defense is dropped, but he's busting his ass. Give me the movement shooter that might not be a good defender, but it's willing to work and apply it. Like, I was like in Utah, like that was the issue. Is they had too many of those, right?
Yeah.
But like, could have Utah survived one of those players being out there? They just couldn't survive when it was 3 players that were getting cooked all the time. Can Rudy protect one of them?
And maybe I'm just looking at it through the lens of, because I've been so impressed with Nas, right? And then Kyle's only value right now is playing defense, and then obviously Nikhil. They really play 1 through 8, all plus defenders. I mean, Carl stepped it up. Mike can hold his own. So I think I'm more of I want all my guys to be good at defense. You make a good point on that. Gary Trent Jr. is a fun name. I've never thought of that. I've always he's got some nasty to him, so I like that. But I don't know. I don't want to speak for the entire state of Omaha, but I would imagine McDermott Timberwolves jerseys would help pay for the second apron. So that would be, I guess, an intrinsic value. But none of those games really do it for me. The name that Coop just threw on is another one.
Yeah,
from Graham Power. Royce O'Neal, and try to have Lonnie Walker included for that spark plug. $10 million total salary for those two. There has been some, reports, whether you believe them or not, Royce O'Neal, Dorian Finney-Smith, both on the Nets. I mean, I think the Nets will become sellers at some point. They have a lot of pieces, but I think Royce O'Neal is like not a poor man's Jaden McDaniels, but he can shoot the 3. He's bigger, can defend.
See, I think Dorian Finney-Smith is the poor man's Jaden McDaniels.
That's fair, but I think Dorian Finney-Smith would probably cost more.
Sure, yeah, he's a little less poor. Yeah, I'm
because he's a little less poor. Yeah, or no, whatever. But Royce O'Neal also, again, not to stick to this, but it's
that's the thing. The Utah thing is a thing. Like they went after Joe Ingles this summer. I don't know, like that wasn't just all about. I mean, Joe Ingles fit some needs, like point guard, and that would make sense on this team, but. Part of the reason behind that was obviously familiarity with Rudy. And we've learned just from watching Rudy here and the Mike element of it, even the Nikhil element, like when they traded for Nikhil right away and Nikhil started playing last season, he immediately like entered the top 5 of most comfortable that just looked the most synergistic with Rudy. I don't think that was all about like inherent skills within Nikhil Alexander-Walker. I think it was about having played with Rudy Gobert before. Mike Conley's talked about that at length. So I think that's a real thing. I think we can assume that's a real thing at this point, or at least we can connect the dot that this front office believes it's a real thing. So yeah, bump Royce O'Neal. Like if we're choosing between Royce O'Neal and Dorian Finney-Smith in terms of likelihood, simply on the basis that Royce O'Neal has played with Rudy Gobert, the likelihood of that happening is probably higher. I just think, be big, man. Stay big. Dorian Finney-Smith is would be a big 3, could guard a ton of wings, like shoots a 3, would have no problem just chilling in the corner, that would, you're right though. That's probably more expensive and you're probably emptying the asset pool to go and get him. And I'm not even sure of exactly what his contract situation is there, but yeah, Brooklyn's we look at a lot at the Detroits and Washingtons and the teams that seem like obvious fire sales, just given how bad they are. Seems like Brooklyn might be one of those two, even though they're not that bad. They're obviously a level above the terrible teams in this league. But yeah, it makes sense to me to keep an eye on.
Can you imagine a little Kyle Anderson, Ben Simmons pick and roll? Just the spacing with that. No, I like the Royce O'Neal one. Alex K has. What about Landry Shamet if Wolves strike out elsewhere? Should take minimal capital to get him even worth it. Shooting 39% from 3. Going to be honest with the chat. No idea where Landry Shamet's currently playing.
Wizards.
And that backs up my point. But again, like the Wizards, right?
But that's the archetype, though.
Yep.
You know how Landry Shamet has played. It's feel like he's been in the playoffs every year for the last 6 years on a different team every single time. But like maybe. When we're talking about envisioning movement shooter, that's what Landry Shamet is. It's a player that can hunt space, and I think he would work. He would meet that, like would work defensively in terms of like effort. I don't know if it would work, and you'd be like, oh, our defense is still awesome because it's a downgrade defensively from Nikhil Alexander-Walker or Landry Shamet. But I don't hate that name. I haven't really seen that floating around too much. He's kind of got a weird contract situation where. It's like the Shake and Troy Brown Jr. one, where I think he's on for like 10.5 this year, and then it's like 11 million non-guaranteed next year. So he could just be a rental, and I would maybe assume would be just given the luxury tax stuff for next year. But don't hate that name at all. Haven't heard it at all though either.
Yeah, so I was looking this up on my phone, but John Tucker has it too. Can't go without mentioning Bogdanovich. The Bogdanovich from the Hawks, not the one from the Pistons, who I think would also probably be way outside the Wolves. I mean, Bogdanovich from the Pistons is really nice, but he is just outside, despite his Utah connections as well. He is just way too expensive for this team. That
I think they both might be, man.
And that's a good point too. But the Bogdanovich one from the Atlanta's been a little more fire saleable. Maybe they've been rumored to every team.
And Detroit?
Than most teams.
Okay.
But I was looking up his contract right now, trying to figure it out. Do you any thoughts on him? And that name has actually been out there in the Twitter sphere, so I think it's worth bringing up.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of player style archetype, he'd be awesome. The
problem with him is he's making $18.5 million this year on the first year of a 4-year deal.
Yeah.
So 17.2 next year, 16 the next, and then a club option in 26, 27. So
I don't know, man. They're so much smarter with salary cap stuff than me, but I just go like, what? I look at my salary cap sheets and I'm like, how does that work?
How are we going to build Tolosa?
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's the whole element of it is like, what are we? What is even the willingness to pay and spend? And
we'll get into that someday, I know, but
yeah,
it's a good name.
It's just hard for me to do that, though. Maybe they're all in. Maybe this is the year. They're like, Mike's, whatever, going to be gone, and Rudy's not getting any younger. Like, let's do it. Let's go. I don't know. It's hard salary, not player type. I think he'd be awesome from a style of player, like almost perfect, but hard for me to put that one together.
You know what else is kind of interesting this year with the Wolves not being bottom feeders and they're trying to be contenders and be buyers. When you just look at the standings, I think it was Keith Smith had this, but like 60% of the picks in the next couple of years are owned by like half a dozen teams. But there's teams like right now today in the standings, the Nets are in 11th in the East, but they owe their pick this year to the Rockets. So they don't really have any, they're not enticed.
Sorry, who is this? The
Brooklyn Nets.
The Nets owe it to the Kings.
The Nets this season are in 11th and they owe their first round pick to the Rockets. So it's not like we're talking about, should they bottom out? Well, they don't really have an incentive. The Toronto Raptors are 12th. They just made all their trades. They're trying to kind of win. In the West, the Rockets are 11th. They are full on, we want to win. The Warriors are 12th. So we keep bringing up the Pistons. We keep bringing up the Wizards. We keep bringing up kind of these bottom feeders. There's not a lot of teams right now that are going to have available assets. But then also, too, there's not a lot of teams that have financial capability to take on longer salaries. So
you're right. It's a weird, it's an economic thing. We're in a weird thing going on here in terms of where how the assets are in one place and the money is in another place. And then the cap space is like kind of in a different place. Like everyone knows, I really like this stuff and follow it. It's a unique time that I don't like. Maybe some of the principles that we've applied from previous seasons might not apply as well. And maybe that changes. I don't even know like in what direction, if it makes guys more expensive in terms of the assets, the cost to get them or less. It's just, I think we're going to lead like on Thursday afternoon after the trade deadline next week and be like, that was weird. Mm-hmm. I just think that's what we're going to come out of this with is that was weird.
And I do think I'm kind of stealing this from a national person, but I also think it's why big trades have already happened.
Yeah.
Like the Harden one was separate because he was kind of toxic and had to get out of there. But you've seen the Raptors move on from OG. You've seen some of these trades kind of happen, like Siakam to Indiana, happen just earlier than you need. Like you would think if I'm going to trade Siakam, why don't I just wait until the deadline to get the biggest value? Maybe these GMs have all talked and it's like, listen, man, it's going to be a pretty slow deadline. It's going to be a bunch of Monte Morrises moving around. Yeah. So I'm with you on that. And again, today is not the buyout trade talk or whatever, the buyout pod, because we don't know who's going to be a buyout candidate.
But that might be where they make, that might be where they get their guy.
And you've educated us all with like the second apron and all, hard cap and all that stuff. Some of these contenders that you're looking at in the West, they can't even go sign, if a Gordon Hayward does get bought out and he's making well above the mid-level, some of these teams can't legally go get that guy in a buyout market. So that's where you hope that Tim Conley being, a top 5 exec or whatever can kind of wine and dine these guys in the buyout market. But for now, Monte Morris, Dennis Smith Jr., those types of names are what we're going to talk about.
I wonder how that's going to work in the buyout market as an aside, just in terms of like, does Gordon Hayward get bought out and then sign on a minimum, or does he do what Kevin Love did last year and sign for like $6 million?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would assume it's that the Kevin Love thing, and the Wolves can't do that. Like, without going into the luxury tax this season, they would need a buyout guy would need to be a minimum guy to be able to bring them in. Again, I don't know, but the Kyle Lowrys, the Haywards, and stuff like that, if they do get bought out, it becomes a bidding war, and then it goes to a team using an exception to get them, like, rather than a minimum. You know, how does that all play out? Monte Morris, we haven't talked about him. Heathy 46 asked, why not just swap Kyle for Monte Morris? Maybe toss in the second this year. Morris could be solution long term, and as much as we like Kyle and his Swiss Army like God status. Yeah, I think for me, maybe I should take off my brain of it, right? I just don't see the huge backup point guard need because, yeah, Monte Morris would help if Mike Conley gets hurt, but we've said this before. My stance is kind of Mike Conley gets hurt, like just
the Jenga tower falls.
Yeah. So it would help you in the games that Mike Conley misses during the regular season for sure. Might help you get the 1 seed. That's not nothing. Maybe that's worth a second or two. You do lose Kyle in that. Mm-hmm. I would more be willing to do that for Shake Milton and Troy Brown Jr. in a couple seconds. But I don't know. Monte Morris, I've seen him play. I don't know. He's probably played like 6 games or something this year. I watched him play once. It looked normal, but like, I don't know. Like, Monte Morris is in a weird situation here too, where he has played like 6 games in the past year. Could be one of those where we think we're trading for the Monte Morris that stepped in for Jamal Murray 2 years ago, whatever that was. And he might not be that player anymore, but I don't know. He might be. He very well could be as well. So yeah, that his name firmly belongs in the backup point guard pile there, just as much as DeLon Wright, you know. And I just as easily could have brought up Monte Morris instead of DeLon Wright. I did DeLon Wright because I just feel like that name hasn't been thrown out there as much as Monte Morris's name has been, but kind of same answer for me on Monte Morris as it is DeLon Wright.
The only other name I had, again, I mentioned Dennis Smith Jr. That would be if you can prize someone from Brooklyn, but again, backup point guard doesn't really shoot very well. I just sometimes watch the Wolves in transition and feel like only one guy can really sprint. So sometimes it'd be fun to have younger athletes that have a little more pep in their step, but Bones
Dennis
Highland.
Smith Jr. was awesome defensively last year too.
That's true, yeah. But Bones Highland, right? Just kind of rotting away in Los Angeles with the Clippers. No real path for him to play on that team. They have so many guards and so many wings. Didn't really work out in Denver. But another name that people are familiar with, know his game, and know his association with Tim Connolly. So just thoughts.
Yeah. It comes back to that same thing of, can this team afford to have a 0 defender because they're the number 1 defense, right? If you ever would think that could work, it would be with the number 1 defense, but it's the GOAT path thing. It's all that and Bones, that would be in a playoff series, something that gets picked at, you know, but he's absolutely the poster boy of the bucket getter phylum of these guys. The one thing with Bones, that when I wrote him down, he's 2.3 million this year. It is 4.2 million next year. And, you know, it's probably like a good contract for him. I don't think that's like a negative value, but it's another 4.2 million when that spot probably we're thinking is a minimum guy, you know, right? On next year's team, just to, you know, that 2 million versus 4.2 million, that kind of makes a difference in this team here. Again, like any Bones thoughts I'm going off of are from at least a year ago. You know, when I was watching him, it's kind of do we know that you get him and you plug him in and he was that awesome 6th man for the Nuggets 2 years ago? I don't know. I mean, maybe, but also maybe not.
I'm putting you on the spot here. This is super inappropriate, but I was on the trade machine just now because I was like, you know what? Let me, like, you bring in Bones Highland, and maybe he's just an emergency guy, or you just try to groom him to be like, okay, a year from now when we need cheap guys that can play, maybe you are a little bit of our Jalen Noel off the bench. And I was like, Shake Milton wouldn't be. I don't think Shake Milton's going to work here, and I'd be surprised if he's on the roster a week from now. But I don't necessarily think Shake Milton is just a bad player. I think maybe he just needs a different spot. So I was like, can you do Shake for Bones straight up? According to the trade machine, you can't. But on the trade machine, there is a
Bones is 2.3 and he's 5. Oh, the trade exception?
Do you know the $3.688 million D'Angelo Russell trade exception?
Yeah, you could use that to bring in Bones. He's under that. I mean, normally a trade exception of that size is useless.
Right.
But that, yeah, I think that would be a situation in which that would work. You wouldn't have to send anything out. But you might want to. It's what's interesting is Bones makes 2.3. His cap hits 2.3 million, and the Wolves are, where did I write that down? 2.36 below the tax. So yeah, I guess you could just absorb him into the exception, pay a couple seconds for it, and stay underneath the tax. Yeah,
and for a Clippers team that is not on the Phoenix Suns level, but is very asset poor. If they're like, hey, we're just not going to play this guy, maybe we can just
maybe they take the 2 seconds and then they
use that for something else. So
I
like that name. I mean, again, if Bones Highland isn't getting any run in Denver or the Clippers, 2 teams that are contenders, probably need to mute our expectations for him on the best team in the West. But maybe that's more of a long-term play of, we're trying to keep one eye towards the summer and towards next season. But I saw someone kind of sum it up in the chat just now. And again, thanks to everyone who tuned in for 90 minutes of DeLon Wright talk. But there is a chance, right, that internally, no matter what Kyle's struggles have been offensively, that Finch is just like, I trust that man to do too many things, and that this is the 8-man rotation, and they don't really do anything. And then they are aggressive in the buyout market, which I think, based on limited, I just think it might be spicier than we think, because every year there's buyout guys, and this year there are so many teams. I think it's like the Suns and the Nuggets and the Clippers maybe, and someone else, like they can't even legally sign these guys. So the Wolves would have kind of an advantage there. And again, that's an important advantage because we just talked about how limited assets we have. It's an asset to be able to bid against buyout guys with less people bidding against you.
No, absolutely. That's the next step, right? Thursday and the deadline and how the market shakes out, right? Like that's going to be the biggest thing. It's even at this stage with a lot of these guys' names that we're throwing out, the price tag today very well could be a protected first round pick. On Thursday, if you're Washington and it's one of these expiring, the Shamet, the Tyus, the DeLon Wright, it kind of becomes best offer available at that point. And if nobody's willing to pony up for it, then I think that's maybe where the Wolves like slide it. Like if the Wolves make a trade, an asset, trade, I think our response is going to be, that was a great deal, because it was, they just can't trade enough assets for it to be a bad deal, really. You know what I'm saying? Like they can't really overpay in a trade right now because the total amount of assets they have is like the right amount for an 8th man.
And we did this. Phil said this the other day. He's like, has Tim Connolly missed? And it's like, well, the Wendell Moore pick was so far a pretty big miss. It was kind of like the Justin Patton pick where it's like we made this big trade for this all-star and we still got to keep this first round pick, and then we got this guy. And it's like, well, Justin Patton is in China and Wendell Moore, I don't know where he is. But outside of that, you also just got to trust that whatever they do, it's probably the right move, because as much heat as he faced early on, I'm with Phil. Like, what has Tim really missed on? Even if you think signing Shake Milton or Troy Brown Jr. are misses, the contracts are not misses. I mean, yeah, it would have been great to have better free agents in hindsight that are more contributors to this current roster, but I don't know. Maybe
Wendell can be liquidated into a second too. Somebody else, and then you can take that and add that to the other.
I'm low on Wendell, which is weird because I'm so high on the young guys. But I still think it's like the pedigree of coming from Duke, and I don't know, he's put on a little size. I would be shocked if some team wouldn't give him a chance, unless it's just that bad that no one will. But that's another thing too, is like maybe they liquidate him before you got to worry about player options and stuff to try to get another second.
Yeah.
The recap of all this is that they have limited assets, but they have. That second round pick, people have started to talk about second round picks in the NBA being really kind of valuable, especially if they're in the top 5, because you're not like beholden to the first round rookie scale.
Right? Yep.
So I think that second round pick that the Wolves have this summer that belongs to Memphis. I mean, you know where Memphis is in the standings. It could be the 5th pick in the second round. That's going to have some value in a league that all of a sudden you look around and the Suns and the Clippers and all the other teams, the Nuggets, they don't have. You think the Wolves have
Memphis
limited
pick
assets?
Is a real asset. That's as far as second round assets go. It's immediate, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's next summer, and it's going to be like 36th, and that matters for sure. Do we miss anything? I mean, I don't know. I'll probably talk a little bit more trade with Chris and Jace and Britt before the deadline tomorrow.
There is a man down in Los Angeles who was pretty right back in the day on the Kawhi Leonard to the Clippers stuff, who is now floating out some LeBron weird emojis on Twitter. LeBron might be available. So I didn't want to do it at the beginning, but whatever you got to piece together to get LeBron, and you draft Bronny this summer with the 29th pick, and now you're really cooking with gas. But no, it's going to be, I know you'll be on top of it. I'm sure we'll do emergency pods and all that stuff, but it's a really exciting time, and it's a very awkward time, right? Like, you've done this now for 7 years. Every year at this time, it's like, okay, they could trade this $30 million contract, or they could trade this guy for pieces, the Scott Layden thing. It's like, how many assets can we bring back because we suck? Well, they don't suck, but it kind of makes it more difficult now to figure out what can we do with limited resources, and will that player fit into a team that has issues and has, clunky offense and some guys that don't really put the ball in the basket, but, to bring it all the way back to the top, to Rudy Gobert, the best defense in the league by a mile. It's their calling card, and you don't want to fuck with that this late in the season, especially the chemistry and all that stuff. So it's going to be a crazy week. I know you'll have it covered. We'll probably, talk about silly stuff over at Flagrant House, but it's a really fun time in the NBA.
Yeah, no, I mean, I forgot that you guys were having Jim on. That's I'll listen to that.
He's so good. Yeah, if this pod is the best because there's so much knowledge, and Britt and Chris and Jace, but Jim is so great. We're going to be having Jim on almost every Thursday, or as many Thursdays as possible. So check it out if you want kind of a different perspective on the Wolves. And Jim is great because he calls it like it is. He has, he's with the team just as much as any player or coach. He's on the plane, he's on the bus. And I think he had a really cool perspective today about two bigs. I mean, I forgot this, but Jim Peterson played with the Rockets with the original Twin Towers.
He was Naz Reid.
And he was Naz Reid, right? Because they had Akeem Olajuwon and Ralph Sampson, Carl and Rudy, and then he was the third big, and he was beloved in Houston because he was an energy guy. He didn't probably have Naz's hair, but he
did have hair, though.
He did have some hair, that's true. So really cool conversation. I hope you guys check it out. Yeah, but sure. We'll be tuned in to the Dane Moore NBA podcast for all updates on CBA and Second Apron and Blue Apron and trade deadline and all that stuff.
Next up will be Monday. I think I'll do that with Jace after the Rockets game. We're not going to do any this weekend because we did this tonight, so nothing off of the Magic game on Friday. But that'll be on Monday morning. I am doing the road trip to Chicago and Milwaukee next week on Tuesday and Thursday. So it'll kind of, for listeners who listen all the time, I think it'll kind of be like that last trip, the Dallas, Orlando, Boston one. Maybe Chris and I will do something like at the stadium right after the game in Chicago, that sort of thing. So a little bit of different order, different times, but I always like to be around the team around the trade deadline. I think that helps. And if there is a new player that they trade for next week, maybe they'll be in Milwaukee on Thursday or something like that, or we'll at least get to talk to the players and the coaches about what that player means. So yeah, as always, excited week. And then I'm coming out to you in Portland.
Then I submitted my PTO, so I'm not going to be on I'll be at Waste Management next week in Scottsdale, Arizona, watching some golf. So I won't be on the pod next week, but the following week we're going to have a ton of pods. It's going to be the week between the trade deadline and the All-Star break. Two games out here in Portland on a Tuesday, Thursday with Valentine's Day sandwich in between. But again, that'll be interesting because did Rudy make it as an injury replacement? Do they have a new player? How's that player folding in? So January, and we knew this coming in, January is the doldrums of the NBA season. They're battling with football. It's cold, whatever. It really spices up now this next week, these next couple weeks. And then when you get back, we can talk about this. Dude, the Wolves have like 18 straight days from that last Portland game because they like have a week off for the All-Star break. And then they have 7 straight games at home.
Games,
So if you're like Mike Conley, you just get to spend like 3 weeks at home. That's got to be awesome. And then they go on the road but the schedule then gets really wild right after that with a lot of winnable games, one tough road trip. And then before you know it, it's going to be playoffs in downtown Minneapolis, April, and it's going to be 65 and we're going to be wearing shorts. So it's a good time, but I appreciate everyone that listened tonight. This was kind of a weird thing we wanted to do. I know we went long with 90 minutes, but shout out to Cooper, shout out to everyone.
Yes.
Subscribe, shout out to you and everyone that contributes to this pod.
Yes, and thank you to you, Kyle. You guys all follow Kyle on Twitter already, I'm sure. At Kyle Taggy. I'm Dane at DaneMooreNBA. We have Dane Moore NBA podcast on Instagram and TikTok. If you want to be, following some of the little clips and reels and stuff like that we do, planning on like maybe ramping that up a little bit with some more stuff, at least come playoff time and maybe some more locker room access and that sort of stuff. So it helps, to have some of those numbers go up in terms of followers and subscribers on the page here too. So just for the 400 of you that are in here right now watching it live 90 minutes in, if you don't
go hug your family.
Yes. And we're gonna go relax to 2 pods in one day. But yes, thank you to Kyle. Thank you to all of you listening until Monday with Jace after the Rockets game. He's Kyle. I'm Dane. Peace out.